Have you got your...
Yes, we are recording,
Great.
Rav. All the best.
Okay. Are we ready, everybody? Let me go for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you must always do what you think is right. You know,
You anybody let me know because I can't do it.
you know.
Okay.
Every year.
L'chaim, everybody. Good stuff.
The trouble is, I see you sent a message, but I don't read the phone. I don't read the message.
If they don't read the message, they could be parking in College Muse right now and knocking on. I wouldn't be surprised if there's 3-4 guys parking by Michael, knocking on the door, wondering why they can't get in. Sometimes you're right. Sometimes people don't even read a message. Okay. We're almost there. L'chaim, everybody. Anyone with a yurt site or a birthday or somebody to say l'chaim for? You had a yurt site?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. This last Shabbos.
Okay, that you got to give.
Rivka Bas, Michael.
Well,
So l'chaim for Rivka Bas, Michael.
did you give it to her already?
I think I hear someone. Yes, someone.
Yes.
Check.
It's here.
Trouble is, when Martin,
Hello.
Liz, they just letting someone else in.
we won't realize Martin's here, Jeff.
Hey.
I think we should go wait for Martin.
Yeah, go ahead at the corner with a torch.
Martin is not ready to come yet, to tell you
You
now.
want to say Eddie's gonna buy her food that they.
When is Eddie going? Soon.
Yeah.
You know what, it's got a pick
Go.
up.
Yeah.
She can change it.
Do what? Just before we start. You know, what we see.
Yeah, I know he is. I don't.
Huh? It's Brian. How's it, Brian?
There you are.
We didn't intend to lock you out, Brian.
It's been, yeah.
Yeah.
It's in where?
That's empty.
If Brian was there, but this one's empty.
This one's empty.
Okay, so
Whiskey glass.
what we had discussed in our Gemora previously about Moshe Rabbeinu grinding the golden calf, we had in this last week's parsha. Saul just mentioned it, pointed it out. It's actually very nice to see the things that we've noticed in Gemora in the parsha of the week. In fact, when I was a child, I remember I had a teacher who said you have to look at the whole Torah as a puzzle. Everything is a piece that fits somewhere. It was a very nice way of putting it. Every single thing, even if it's Gemora, you're going to find things that fit in the parsha. And if it's the parsha, you're going to find things that fit in your davening. Everything is cohesive. Everything matches with everything else. And we were just chatting up here before we started. Saul asked how come by Moshe Rabbeinu, he made them drink the solution. When he ground the golden calf into dust, the people had to drink it. That was a call of the hour, that besides for getting rid of the golden calf, there was also a test that the loyalty of the people had to be tested by drinking that water. And it was also a form of punishment for those that were disloyal. But normally,
Thanks.
Like Isha Sota.
yeah, like Isha Sota, exactly, like the suspected adulteress, exactly. But in the general discussion of our Gemara that we've had pages, we're not talking as much about testing or figuring out who's guilty. We're talking more about how to get rid of the Avodah Zarah and what the responsibility is in terms of getting rid of it. In many areas of halacha, sorry?
To purge them.
Yeah, exactly. In many areas of halacha, there is an analysis which is based on, this is a general formula, chefza and gavra. Chefza means the object and gavra means the person. If you put on tefillin, the tefillin is the object, it's a very holy object, but it's still an object, and you are the person doing the mitzvah. You can't do the mitzvah without the tefillin, and the tefillin can't have the mitzvah done without you. So it's an important partnership. But however, it is a partnership because you have a responsibility, a chiyuv to put on tefillin, and you cannot discharge that chiyuv or do it if you don't have a kosher pair of tefillin. And in many cases in Jewish law or in analysis, sometimes it will be discussed how things affect the object or how things affect the person. So for instance, when we talk about avodah zarah, which is that somebody created, so to speak, an idolatrous object, and that now is a profanity that has to be gotten rid of, we're talking about two things. We're talking on the one hand about the fact that you can't benefit from it, or maybe you can benefit from it if it's revoked properly. That's to do with you. And then there is what is the responsibility to do with the object. Like the Torah says, and most of those psukim that the Gemora quoted come from Devarim, from Deuteronomy, ki horeis to horeseim, v'shabeir to shabreim. You will get rid of them, you'll destroy them, you'll break them. The Torah is telling us that when you, the Jewish people, come to the land of Canaan, and you find things there that are profane to Hashem and to the Jewish people, so you will have an obligation to get rid of them. So the discussion about grinding that we had till now, and that discussion is, I think it's grinding to an end, grinding to a halt, because we're reaching the Mishnah, which will bring on other subjects, similar but different. But the main discussion we had is about whether grinding was or is an effective way of getting rid of the avodah zarah, not as much as testing who made it, why did they make it, are they guilty for making it. That wasn't the main angle of the discussion in our Gemora.
But practically, how did Moshe were able to grind it?
Sorry?
From a practical perspective, how was he able to take it then? When we just
Well,
think
they
about
had all along. They had utensils there. They were making gold jewelry all the time. They must have had everything. They
Like
put
you
these
mean
stones
practically?
together and they
You mean if you didn't have a grinding machine, how did you
Yeah.
grind it? I guess in those days, the artisans, they could grind by
in
like
those
a,
days they
like
rubbed
a
two
hand-
stones
yeah.
together.
Yeah.
But the same question was not gold.
Yeah.
The car. There was no crucible and fire. Everything was provided.
No, but
Yeah.
according to Aaron, he threw the gold in the fire and the calf came out on its own. That's that form.
It says they melted.
Yeah, he melted it, and that was the form that
What did he
came out
melt it in?
in the fire, in the burning fire. It was a,
So back inside the text, there was a discussion in the last Gemara.
there was no crucible.
They made a fire and it came out, but actually there were
No, maybe they had.
But they must have had some,
No,
because they were
no,
making
what-
jewelry the
well,
whole
what the
time.
Medrash says- No, but what the Medrash actually says is that there were some, how would you call it, sorcerers there that had come out of Egypt.
Yeah.
In other words, you know,
Well, the Arab Rab did it.
the Erev Rav, exactly. And
those
they
special
knew
words.
how to say certain, call it certain voodoo things and formulae, and they said stuff and did certain rituals which caused it to happen. And by the way, what that reminds us is there is a mistaken premise in the world or assumption that people often make that if something looks supernatural, it is definitely holy. So for instance, if I show you that I can fly, then that means for sure it's holy. Now, the truth of the matter is there is a concept of things that are spiritual, but not from tzedakah kedusha. They don't come from the side of holiness. They come from the opposite side, from the opposition, so to speak, as per what Hashem made in his world. And we see that right in the beginning. The very first anti-Semites in the world were the Egyptians. And Paray had his Khartoumim, his magicians. And if you think about it, although the Pasuk says, the verse says in a few places that Khartoumei Paray tried to do this, that, and the other, they weren't able, but there were some pretty hectic things they were able to do. If you look at what they were able to do, the scorecard wasn't too bad, if you think about it. A little bit more than you and I could do.
But
they-
black magic was
yeah,
in there, like
yeah,
high-tech.
exactly.
But they were already
Exactly.
artisans of
Yeah.
all different.
There were sorcerers in the world, and there still
and they were
could be. Yeah.
artisans.
And there are, by the way, yeah.
The best artisans to do the mishkan.
What's that called? Necromancy.
Yes, exactly.
That word and they turned into that sort of thing.
So there are different opinions given as to exactly what was done, but there were so-called naughty people who had spiritual powers. Bilam, for instance. Bilam was a soothsayer. He was a prophet of the Gentiles, but Bilam had tremendous spiritual powers. The Gentiles of the world recognized him for his spiritual powers. He had an ability to impact in how would you call it, in that kind of way. And coming up soon is Purim. We've already been through Purim Cotton. Purim, the big Purim is coming in Adar Shani in 3 weeks' time. Haman also, besides for the, how would you call it, the natural side of things, in other words, shoring up political stuff against the Jewish people, besides for Haman going to, what do they call it, the ICJ and whatever else he tried to do to harm the Jewish people, Haman was working on a spiritual plane too. He was trying to figure out where he could find the weaknesses of Am Yisrael, the Jewish people, from a spiritual perspective. Yeah. And even in today's day and age, you actually see it in an obvious way. What are the obvious ways you notice, for instance? Many people notice, for instance, not just politically or media-wise, but that the power of Am Yisrael's connection to Eretz Yisrael is very, very spiritually strong. And if you sort of try to loosen it or break it apart or get people to do crazy things, you can, so to speak, vayochel weaken the spirit. And therefore, we have to stand steadfast and strong, because the enemies do recognize, the spiritual side of things. I'm sure you saw early on, it was about 2-3 weeks after October the 7th. So much has gone around. We've all shared so many things. But I don't know if you saw the one clip where the university student tells the professor, you know, that I was very proud of you, that you stood all by yourself at one of these hateful demonstrations and you stood up against all those people. And he says to her, like, are you Jewish? Why are you supporting this? Because he was so used to everyone else being filled with hate. And she answers and she says, I'm not Jewish. So he says, so what makes you on our side? So she says, because you're one of the chosen people. You're the chosen people. And he turns to her and he says, and this is common, you know, we are often our own questioners. He says, you know, I don't believe that. You know, you my student, I'm an atheist. I don't believe that. So she says, you don't believe it, but we know it. You don't have to believe it. We know it. And
Rabbi, doesn't Hashem say that we his most treasured nation?
Yeah.
He doesn't say that we his most chosen nation.
Yeah, in the sadness, in the difficulty of the world we live in, you see it so clearly. In other words, yeah, yeah, absolutely. It comes with tremendous responsibility. But in it, you see it. You know, when we talk about political analysis and we try very hard to state our case in the world and whatever, in the hypocrisy that you see in the world, that the same people who literally don't give a continental, if 100,000 of these kind of people kill 500,000 of those kind of people, they don't even bother to say something between breakfast and lunch at all. But if so-called one Jew seems to be harming one, I don't know what else, they're suddenly screaming and shouting and whatever. Besides for the hypocrisy, the political hypocrisy, which is obvious, it's the reality is it's because they see the truth. Deep down, those haters see the truth. It's in the Amalek Yudeis Koinai. Haman and Amalek and all these people, they know who we are better than we know who we are. And it's something to take strength from. Sorry?
The word Yehuda represents
acknowledgement and truth. They know exactly who Am Yisrael is, and that's why it says about Amalek. Amalek Yodaya es Koina, he knows his creator, and he still wants to rebel. In other words, the hate comes from a place of acknowledgement.
Like Bilam.
Yeah, like Bilam also. Bilam was the same thing. So here we're talking about in the last Gemora, let's read some words inside, that the Gemora had spoken of a certain incident where David HaMelech, King David, conquered some of the Philistines, of the Plishtim, and they took a particular crown. There was a very unique crown, and the crown was of an idol called Malcolm, and they put it on his head, on the head of the king. So the Gemora wants to start talking about that crown. If you remember, the Gemora first asked how we could get involved with a crown. Yeah, that's actually where we were. How could we get involved with a crown that was Avodah Zarah? Because you're not supposed to have benefit from it. And if you remember, the Gemora answered that there was a particular person called Itai Hagiti, Itai the Gittite. He came from a group of Plishtim that actually supported David HaMelech. There was a group of people. We have it again. The more things change, the more they stay exactly the same. There will be some notable, worthy people that see who Am Yisrael is and who we are and stand with us against all odds. You have some of them in this land and all over the world. And Itai Agiti and some of his people also stood with David HaMelech. And David asked him to revoke the idolatrous status of that golden crown that they had captured, which he did. And this is based on the discussions in the Gemara. We already said that Gentiles could do that they have the power to revoke the status of something that is idolatrous. The Gemara goes on a tangent now. It wants to discuss this crown. The crown seemed to weigh quite a lot, and they wanted to know how you could put this crown on the head of a human being. In other words, it seemed to be something too heavy. So the Gemara says, Mishkala kikar zahav. If its weight was a talent of gold, we can check because there are places where biblical measurements are put into their modern equivalent. But however, one thing that's agreed, the sages of the Gemara agree that a kikar was an extremely big amount of that mineral of gold. And it doesn't seem possible that you could put a crown that weighed that much on a person's head. So the Gemara wants to know, it's a practical question. How do you put it down on King David's head? And the Gemara has three answers. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, it was a figurative expression. The story wasn't that they put it on his head. The story was that they said that this exquisite ornament is befitting of our royal king. They didn't actually put it on his head. That's one way to answer it. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina Omar, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, second way of explaining it, Even she'eves haisaba, the havas darala, there was a suspension stone there that it would hang upon. In other words, sometimes the way they dealt with these very heavy ornamental crowns is the crown actually wasn't worn, so to speak. It was too heavy to be worn. It was literally suspended or built into some kind of system. Let's say that there were, I don't know what, pillars or support poles or whatever they might have been. In fact, some of the Mefarshim say they even used to use very strong magnets for this purpose, that magnets were available, even in the ancient days. And somehow they would be able to create a support structure that the person could, so to speak, sit under it, but it wasn't actually resting on his head because it would crush a human head. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi but Rabbi Chanina, that there was that there was some kind of magnetic suspension system. So in other words, the weight of a kikar of zav, full talent of gold. I'm not sure what that figure is. We could find it out because, but it's a lot of kilos and it's much more than would be in would be in a head. Rabbi Lazar said, the crown itself did not weigh an amount that was untenable to put on a head. But what it means is there was a precious stone on that crown, which was as valuable as a kikar of gold. So let's say a kikar is 100 kilos of gold. We're not saying that we put 100 kilos of gold on his head. We're saying that there was one precious stone on that crown. And if you want to know what it was worth a whole talent of gold. So that's three different ways that the Gemara explains how it could be that it was humanly possible for this golden crown to be placed on the head of the king. And that's just, this is what you call a side discussion. And from that, the Gemora goes into a further discussion about the concept of the crown. And it says, the Gemora says, you get certain places in Gemora where certain psukim, verses from Psalms or Tehillim, are explained. And those are also very important because we say Tehillim all the time. So it's nice to know the deeper meaning of the words of Tehillim that we say. The big capital. Who knows which is the biggest chapter? 119. 119 is the big, long chapter of Tehillim with the Aleph Bays. Yeah. It's as big as about. It goes on exactly.
And when people are saying Tehillim, they say not 119.
Exactly.
Whenever
You got to share 119 out around.
groups.
Yeah. So in 119, verse 56, there's a verse that goes, Zeis haisali, this I had, kifikudecha notzarti, because I kept your precepts or your mitzvahs. David HaMelech is saying that this thing, and the Gemara is going to ask, what's the this that he's talking about? This special gift that I received or I have got, I merited for keeping your mitzvahs. It's an expression to Hashem above. My ka'omar, hachi ka'omar. What is he saying? This is what he's saying. Bischar shepikudecho notzarti, as a reward for your mitzvahs which I kept. You know, King David is saying, as a reward for Hashem's mitzvahs which I kept. Zeis haisalila eidus. This, the crown, was for me an eidus. Eidut is a testimony. You can have an eid that's a person, a witness in court, but you can have something that's a testimony. You know, like when you pull a coin out the ground in Eretz Yisrael by archaeologists, and there's no doubt that there's Hebrew writing from 2,000 years ago. So then when somebody wants to say nonsense that Jews weren't there 2,000 years ago, there it is. An artifact that's taken out the ground that has, how would you call it? It physically represents Jewish presence and Jewish history in the land 2,000 years ago. That's an eidus. That's a testimony. So King David says, sorry? Yeah.
Arab was saying, this is our land right, this is our land right.
Yeah. Yeah. So David HaMelech says that the crown, right, we're talking about the crown. No, the crown for me is a testimony. What's the testimony of the crown? My edusa. Oh, my Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi taught. They would put the crown on the head in the place of the tefillin, and it would fit him. In other words, what would happen when they took the great crown and they put it on the head of the king, his head would fit in the crown, including the front, which is the place where we put tefillin, and it would be a perfect fit. It would be almost like it was sculpted to the umpteenth degree to fit the king's head. And the fact that the crown would fit in a magical way the king's head, even if maybe the same crown belonged to another king or whatever, it was almost like a miracle that the dimensions of the crown fit the king's head, including the place of putting on tefillin. That would be an indication to the people that this is who God wants as the king, because the crown fits his head perfectly. So, being that the story mentions that the crown went over the place of the tefillin, the Gemora wants to ask, what about tefillin? How could you put your tefillin on if the crown covers over the tefillin? Don't forget that in those days, people wore the tefillin all the time. So in other words, how could the crown have gone over the place where you put the tefillin?
You put this on Shabbos.
So, he needed to put on tefillin. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak taught, Makem yesh b'rosh, there's a place on the head, shiroi le'aniach bo shtei tefillin, that you could literally put two pairs of tefillin. In other words, Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak said that the way that the head is designed, if you take the parameters of kosher tefillin and the parameters of your average head size, and the space of the head that it's kosher to put on tefillin, what you'll find is there's enough space if a person wanted to wear two pairs of tefillin at the same time. And
It used to be very small.
yeah, and in fact, who used to do this? There's a place in Shulchan Aruch where it says that some people, because of the confusion between, not the confusion, but the difference of opinion between the order of the parshias, the order of the sections in Tefillin, according to Rashi and according to Rabbeinu Tam, there were people at one point who used to put on the Tefillin of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam at the same time, right next to each other. Today, the people that put on Rabbeinu Tam, but they put it like us, Chabad do, but they put on after davening. They complete the davening with Rashi Tefillin. So then take off the Rashi Tefillin. But there's some people that still do that, yeah. They wear the Tefillin of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Yeah, and they wear them both at the same time. But the Gemora says that if it's possible to wear 2 boxes of Tefillin at the same time, that means that even if David HaMelech had a crown on his head, and even if the crown covered the parking place of one pair of tefillin, there was still space for at least another tefillin. So he would be able to wear tefillin and the crown at the same time. Yesh b'reish shiroi laniach b'ishtei tefillin. Hence the king would have been able to wear the crown that covered the place of tefillin, and it's no contradiction to the fact that at the same moment he could also be wearing tefillin. And then the Gemara brings another, how would you call it, proof that it says Divrei Hayamim in the book of Chronicles, Bays, that it talks about, which king was this? Yoash, that they brought him out and they put the crown on his head, and the crown fit, and that's how they knew that that in fact he was fit to be king. By Yitzius ben Amelech, they brought out the king's son. Vayitnu olav es ha-nezer, and they put the nezer, the crown, upon him. The word nezer is also used, I think, with the garments of the Kohen Gadol in the parshas we read already. The headgear, yeah. Tzitz nezer hakodesh. That's right. That's exactly what it is. Vayitnu olav es ha-nezer. In the case of the king, the nezer is the crown. They put the crown on the king's head. The Eso Eidus and the testimony. Why does it say crown and testimony? Nezer Zuklila, the Gemara explains the crown is a reference to, the word Nezer is a reference to the crown. Eidus, testimony. What is testimony about the crown? The Gemara is bringing another proof to fortify the point that we already made a few lines up, that the crown is the Eidus, is the testimony that when it fits the head of the king, it shows that he is fit to be king. Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Eidus uleveis David. It was an Eidus, a testimony for the house of David. Shekol aroy lemalchus, that anybody that was fit for the kingship, heilamtai, the crown fit him perfectly. And if he was not fit for the kingship, it didn't fit him properly.
That was a heavy test.
It was a heavy test. And it was a way that everybody could tell. So the Gemara now brings an example of somebody who sought to be king and wasn't really supposed to be king. You know, David HaMelech had 2 sons that tried to rebel and take the kingship, besides 4. Eventually, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, who was the correct king, he had the rebellion of Avshalom, and he had the rebellion of Adoniyahu ben Chagis. This is actually my bar mitzvah parsha, my haftarah.
Your uncle.
Sorry?
So you're going to say he was my uncle.
Oh, what I'm going to say is my uncle. So it says, Adoniyahu ben Chagis misnasei le'meir ani emloich. The pasuk, the verse over there says that Adoniyahu, the son of Chagis, lifted himself up and he said, I am going to rule. He decided that King David, his father David HaMelech, is old and he's going to be the king. Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Rav. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Shemisnasei lahomoi, he tried to wear the crown, but it did not fit him, didn't work. He didn't give up so quickly, but nonetheless, he tried to wear the crown and it didn't work, which should have been an early warning for him that his aspirations were not exactly backed up on high. And then the Gemara continues, he made himself like a parade of chariots and chariot riders, and 50 people that were running before him. He had 50 runners in front and chariots and riders, a whole parade of glory, in demonstrating that he believed that he was the true successor to King David. He would be the next king. On that story, the Gemora asks, what's the big novelty here? Many glorious royalty people managed to get runners in front of them. And 50 doesn't seem to be a big number. In Tanakh and other places, it talks about hundreds of people walking in front of an important person. When Esav met Yaakov, what did he have? 400 thugs with him. Sholem is said to have had 200 in a parade in front of him. So why is there a fuss that Adoniyahu ben Chagis had 50 ish ratzim lefanov? It seems quite small, only 50 men running in front of him. That's like a small shul.
A shtibel.
A shtibel. Myri Basaya, what was the great novelty? So the Gemara answers, the novelty was, the show was, what he did to them. Tana, we learned, those 50 people were designed to run better than anybody else. They would have won the comrades and all the marathons ahead of all of us, every single one of them. Why? First of all, they had their spleen removed. Apparently, I don't know if it holds true today. We could check with the physiotherapists or the modern the modern scientists of sports medicine, but it certainly says that in those days, the organ, the tchol, the spleen, was an impediment to running, and if you managed to take it out successfully, you would be able to run faster. The other thing is it says that he had their souls hollowed out. So in other words, the shape of their souls was literally restructured to run even better than the natural shape. And according to a lot of the commentaries, it's almost like in today's day and age, if you give somebody some orthopedic surgery that makes them, how would you call it, able to do the tracks much better. But basically, the concept is the Gemora saying that Adoniyahu ben Chagis took 50 people and he turned them into champion runners that nobody could run as fast as them. So when they ran in front of him, it was a spectacle, not in number, but in the performance, in the show. People saw that these 50 ran faster than most humans could possibly run. Yeah, I think that's brings us to the Mishnah, so we can continue from there. Any other discussions here? We'll stop over there inside.
Oh, yeah.
Any other discussions?
Nice job today.
Yeah. Koyach to you for the
Martin at the gate.
Martin
I'm
was on
sure
the
you
Zoom.
would have heard of
Martin
you.
was on the Zoom.
You got engaged.
Martin. I said, is Martin, you're seeing Martin at the gate.
Oh, we haven't seen him yet.
I think he was on the Zoom for a bit.
Can I get some more? Can I get you some popcorn?
I'm fine with the popcorn. Thank you. Thank you.
The only foreigner that was here was Les.
Thank you. Thank you.
What was the last sentence, Cyril?
The last sentence in Hebrew was, Tana, we learn, Kulam Natulei Tchol, they were all people who had the spleens removed, and the soles of the feet had been hollowed out. There was like, yeah, spleens.
How did they take out their spleens?
Those, maybe they had a way. It wasn't by, what's the new technology they use these days?
Could help
by
they
laser.
died.
It wasn't by laser.
Those that didn't die remained as runners.
Yeah.
Well, ladies and
Back up
gentlemen,
this
I hope you enjoyed
Apparently it made them run better.
and sorry DJ didn't come.
Oh. It was very.
There's Martin.
There he is.
Hello.
Yours is here.
There's the Martin. Are you at the gate? You're late. Coming.
It's over.
You're never late. That's the
They're
time.
coming for the Zoom.
22. That is time.
Saul, we lost
So
today. We
fun.
lost our bet.
Today.